Well, there you have it. Good morning and afternoon, and thank you all for joining today's panel on cybersecurity and campus cyber readiness. I'm your host, Pepe Carreras, Vice President of the Ed Solutions Group at the National Student Clearinghouse. For those of you who know the National Student Clearinghouse's work, you already know we exist to connect all learners within the education and workforce communities with trusted, actionable information, collected, analyzed, safeguarded, and shared to enable effective decision-making within the education community. For those of you who don't, beyond the data solutions and research insights we offer, we're a nonprofit, mission-driven partner for all in the learning and professional ecosystems and its connecting points. Cybersecurity is essential to our work and vital for the safekeeping of the hundreds of millions of learner records we maintain. For over 30 years, we have collected, safeguarded, consolidated, and offered diverse data solutions, but today we're here to help and build your confidence. Today's conversation is not meant to be a technical discussion, but rather about human behaviors and how to create the right environment within your institutions to help build greater awareness and to encourage continued communication. It wasn't that long ago when cybersecurity was a topic discussed exclusively amongst IT staffers. Today, we know the more we promote this conversation and the more we build awareness, the more secure we can remain. Well, don't take my word for it. I'd like to introduce to you our distinguished panelists for today, experts in this field. First, we have John Ramsey, Chief Information Security Officer from the National Student Clearinghouse. John?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure. I've been the Chief Information Security Officer now for the Clearinghouse for the last 4 years. I've been within the IT security field for probably 20 plus years. Prior to here, I was the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. House of Representatives and the federal government's Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board. With that said, it's an honor to be the Clearinghouse's CISO and helping protect everybody's data.
John, thank you. We also have with us Monty McGee, Associate Director of the Cyber Readiness Institute. Monty, great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much to the National Student Clearinghouse and to all the organizers for having us today. Really appreciate it.
We also have with us Brian Kelly, Director of Cybersecurity Programs, EDUCAUSE. Brian, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, and like John, honored to be here. Long career in higher ed. I was a CISO at Quinnipiac University for 13 years before joining EDUCAUSE officially, but had been part of EDUCAUSE during that entire term of service. So, so important to have this conversation, and again, glad to be here today.
And we also have Joseph Potchanant, Director of Member Services and Support from REN-ISAC, the International Higher Education and Research Network, Cyber Threat Information Sharing, and Cybersecurity Alliance. Welcome, one and all. Welcome, Joseph.
Good to be here. I've been in higher ed my entire career, and I've been with REN-ISAC for about 5 years now, and it's an honor to be here.
Fantastic. Well, with that, let's get right to it. Monty, we have seen several high-profile cyber attacks this year. What is the current state of cyber readiness and security in America?
Thanks for the question, Pepe. Global threat actors are maturing their technologies, coordinating, and recruiting in ways that we have not seen before. And this should raise concerns among administrators, faculty, and students. We see this most acutely in software, supply chain security, as well as ransomware attacks, which still leverage traditional attack vectors like phishing emails. Just recently, a prominent university in the Washington, D.C. area experienced a ransomware attack that caused it to close many of its classes for more than a week. The details are still coming out. However, initial indications suggest that the university was unprepared to respond to this type of attack. The SolarWinds and Kaseya breaches that we all witnessed reminded us that attackers are seeking to inject malware into software development and transfer processes to achieve indiscriminate effects. All this is to say that the attacks have increased in frequency, sophistication, and impact in recent years. And that shift will likely continue around the world as more threat actors improve their business models and acquire more advanced tools and talent.
Excellent, thank you. On your multimedia viewer, you should see our first poll question for the group. What do you think are the most significant cyber threats facing college campuses today? And please submit your response. give or take, about 60% of you think ransomware and 37% stating data breaches. Brian, what are the most significant cyber threats facing college campuses today?
Well, Monty, I'm glad to see that other didn't take over the poll there. But I think one of the things that's not listed there, as we see sort of ransomware and data breaches sort of, really taking the front seat, is that, thinking that we can do it alone, right? That's a significant threat. And I think as Monty pointed out, the cyber criminals, the hackers, they're working in organized groups, they're coordinating, they're recruiting. And we need to do the same thing. It's evident today, right? We really need to work together on our campuses and across our institutions. So having those conversations, as you mentioned, that used to be really in an IT vertical, or it was the ballywhack of the CIO and the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officers, that have those conversations. But collaboration is such a key to help us face those challenges on our campuses. And I think the community that EDUCAUSE provides really helps bridge that between our privacy and our cybersecurity communities, along with our CIOs and our teaching and learning professionals as well. The resources that the REN-ISAC brings to the community, as far as incident response and threat intelligence, and the work that Joe and his team does. And then sort of lastly, right, we look at today with the National Student Clearinghouse and the work that John is doing, and thought leadership, and helping us all face those challenges together. It is sort of, cybersecurity is a team sport, and we need to be having those conversations with each other and on our campuses. So I think that's how we face the threats that were identified in those polls, and awareness. We'll talk more about that later, but awareness is such a key defense for us.
Thank you, Brian. So Joseph, this question's for you, and Brian has touched on this. We all hear that when everybody's responsible, no one's responsible. So who specifically in a campus is responsible for cybersecurity? Is it IT? Is it administration? Is it faculty?
Well, the perception is that it would be the central IT, but in actuality, as Brian was saying, it's everyone. And to put an example, so if you're thinking about driver safety on the roads today, who's responsible for automobile safety? Is it the company that builds the cars? Is it the engineers that built it? Is it the government that made the laws? Is it the police force that enforced the laws? Or is it the driver themselves? I think when it comes to automobiles, there's much more of an onus on the actual individual driver. Now, of course, I'm not victim blaming or anything like that, but if there was an engineering mistake, or someone built a bridge that was done with substandard parts or anything like that, and something happened, of course, you would hold that particular engineering firm accountable. I think we need to get back to the idea of that everyone is responsible. And those days changed when BYOD happened. I was reading the other day an EDUCAUSE student technology report that said that the average number of devices that students connect to Wi-Fi on a college campus today in any given day is 2, with an overwhelming majority of connecting more than 2. So you've got your smartwatch, your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your gaming system, your Apple TV. All these devices are connecting. So it's really on the individual to take responsibility for that. So I think we need to change the focus a little bit. Instead of blaming people, of put kind of the idea of collective good into it. So if you think to like the U.S. Forestry Service, Smokey Bear, it's a well-known campaign that's been going on since the 40s and 50s. Only you can prevent forest fires, and now it's only you can prevent wildfires. What if we shifted that focus and think only you can prevent phishing? Because it takes each one of us to click on that link to cause that as a problem. So it really is all of our collective problem, and we are all the solution.
All great points. John, as many of today's attendees are registrars and enrollment managers, how do we bring Joseph's comments right into what is their role in helping to build a cybersecurity ready campus?
So I'm going to echo the same theme, that nobody's alone. And the front of the situation is the registrars and enrollment managers. They have a hard job. They have to make decisions every day. They have a direct impact on securing student data. And more importantly, they're trusting that data with their internal IT offices. They're trusting it with external partners. And that's a vast amount of information that they're responsible for, that they're trusting other entities to do the right actions. The reality is it's scary. People's digital lives are in their hands. When you provide that sensitive data to an internal team or that external partner, they become an extension at that point. And then you've got that relationship that's built completely on confidence and trust that that learner data is secure. Choosing third-party service providers for transcript ordering. That's a good example. You're entrusting that partner with your data. You have to ensure that you've got the confidence that when they have the data, they're doing the right things. And probably the first role for the registrars and the enrollment managers is asking the hard questions of anybody until they have confidence that their data is protected. And if you don't have security on the top of your mind, you might make a choice that increases your institution's risk, and nobody wants to do that. So there's a few things. One, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Security really is a common sense approach at the end of the day. If you hear an answer that doesn't make sense, there's probably an underlying issue. Peel that onion. Don't be afraid to peel that onion. But what should you do? Form those relationships. The same thing that Brian said and Joseph said, you're not alone by no means. If you're not meeting regularly with your CIO and CISO, and regularly doesn't mean on a daily or weekly basis, maybe it's monthly or quarterly. But have those conversations with them that if your data is compromised, either at the institution, what actions should you take? Should you contact your third-party partners that you have in place? What if your third-party partner gets breached with your information? What actions should you take? This is the stuff that you want to know now before something actually happens. And those relationships, it doesn't just stop with the CIO and CISO. That financial aid administrator on campus. You want to ensure you're in compliance with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. There's more information security rules there to protect data. You don't want to find out after an issue if you were compliant with the act itself. And then most importantly, involve your staff in those information security discussions. Make it a recurring meeting agenda item. None of us can go a week now without hearing about ransomware at a school. And the irony is, most of the time, the staffers understand where the risks are to your data. Have that open conversation. And next week when they have a staff meeting, just ask, hey, if our data were to get breached, where would it happen? You'll probably be astounded to hear their thoughts on where that can happen. Then the last item I throw out there, know where your data resides, who's using it, why they're using it, and who can access it. Whether it's your team, your internal IT staff, your third-party providers, you'll be surprised at one misconfiguration where you thought 5 people had access to your data, maybe 50 people have access. But it all goes to that point. Feel free and comfortable to ask those hard questions. It's kind of against human nature sometimes, but you owe it to yourselves to have the right answers and make sure that those partnerships provide that confidence.
All good points, John. And just from a housekeeping perspective, there's a Q&A section within the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to submit any and all questions you may have along the way. We'd like to get to as many of those at the end of the session. So Brian, as remote learning grows in popularity, what should educators and students do to protect their online safety?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about awareness. We've been talking about it here on this session, and that's part of what EDUCAUSE does. And I think in fact we're about a week away from National Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October. And when you think about, as we're trying to have our faculty, our staff, and our students, our educators understand what they should be doing, one of the things we saw as a positive outcome of 2020, which I know is really hard to think about 2020 in the context of positive outcomes, but our students and our educators were engaged with campus security and privacy professionals in ways that they had never engaged with each other prior because of that move to remote learning and remote working. And I think, as John has pointed out, and Monty, we sort of all come back to having the conversations, asking questions of your providers, of your campus professionals, and being curious. We've been binge watching Ted Lasso, and there's a line in Ted Lasso where he says, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I think we sometimes rush to judgment, and we need to really be asking those questions. And as John pointed out, when the topics are technical, they can be intimidating, especially for folks outside of IT. in the enrollment managers, registrars area. So we want to encourage those conversations, right? And EDUCAUSE is really what we're committed to, is helping to facilitate those conversations, being more integrative about how we're learning and how we're working across our IT disciplines and our campus disciplines. And, you know, I think, you know, specific to the, you know, the new challenges and the risks that are introduced with remote learning, remote working, you know, we've done papers and work around online proctoring and privacy around that. And also, you know, just having Alexa and Google Assistants listening in your home, whether you're learning or working, are new things. So again, just asking everyone to talk to each other, to go back to their IT people and say, listen, I'm working from home now. Is there new risk when I'm talking about a student record if I have Alexa in my home, and those things? And just have the conversations about the risk. And I know John's mentioned third parties, you know, and the vendors and the suppliers we're working with. As we move to remote learning and working, you know, we all sort of across our campuses allowed sort of new technology to be introduced and used in order to be enabler, right? We found in 2020 that security staff were really shifting to the office of KNOW. We want you to know how to do this securely. We want to enable your teaching and your learning without sort of that stigma that we used to have of being the office of NO, where we would say, no, you can't do that. So all of that was a result of conversations and relationships that were fostered between, you know, before 2020 that really helped us get to where we are today. And like John said, you want to have those relationships ongoing and not just when something unfortunate or bad is happening.
Absolutely. So John, during my intro, I mentioned the Clearinghouse stores, you know, hundreds of millions of academic records. In your role as CISO, how do you ensure that these records are stored and able to be shared securely?
That's a great question, Pepe. And one thing that I promised, and we started off the webinar with, that we're not going to talk technical. I'm not going to talk technical. At the end of the day, you can have all of the resources, security tools, and everything you want, but it really comes down to a strategy and a mentality and a philosophy on how an organization stays secure. So from the strategy perspective at the Clearinghouse, I think one of the first things that we do is that we really look at having a flexible, threat-driven approach first. And what this means, we all have to meet some sort of compliance regulations. And I could probably name 100 commercial customer or 100 commercial companies out there that have been breached in the last 10 years. Have probably met all of their compliance requirements, but they still had a compromise of some sort. So we take a little bit of a different approach. We address the threat first. If we address the threat correctly, we'll be compliant. With that said, we make sure that we can pivot to quickly counter the threat, because that threat is changing all the time. We see it in the papers, we see it in the breaches, we see it in the news. Secondly, and this goes back to Brian's theme and Joseph's theme and our theme here, we build strategic alliances to deter shared risks. We're not alone. More importantly, for the registrars and the enrollment managers, you're not alone. At the Clearinghouse, we try to partner with the best. We partner with Microsoft, FireEye, Mandiant, IBM, Department of Homeland Security. It's not NSC fighting the fight. It's really an alliance of strength and knowledge and partnerships that's fighting the fight when something happens. The next one is that we're never arrogant to think we're safe. There's no such thing as perfect security. We're protecting your learners, our learners. We know we're always the target, but it's our job to make sure that we don't become a victim. And we're going to do everything we can not to let that happen. And we do that because we're continuously assessing and improving our posture. And that really goes into the mentality and the philosophy at the Clearinghouse. We're exercising and we're drilling at all levels at NSC. Everybody at NSC fights the fight. I'm a longtime military person. I'm going to tell you, we want to arm everybody with bayonets. And it's not just the cybersecurity office. We all live this. And this goes into, and Joseph had mentioned it, I believe, and Brian, you know, we have regular phishing exercise campaigns. We're ensuring that every single member and every single staffer at the Clearinghouse is being tested and drilled. We're at about a 1.5% click rate. That wasn't the case when we started, but it's that continuous improvement that gets us there. We built the Security Ambassador program. We have volunteers help us spread the word throughout all the rank and files at NSC. And that's an interesting approach because, again, it's changing the culture. It's not about a security requirement or security mandate. It's about everybody living and breathing security as second nature. When we opened this up to the ambassadors or to volunteers a few years ago, we had more volunteers than we had slots. And that was a wonderful feeling as a CISO that so many people was living and feeling this strong about it. The military has an adage, train as you fight. The cyber team, we do recurring ransomware drills about every 4 to 6 weeks. Our executive team, we do tabletop drills. Just make sure if we get breached, how are we going to respond to this? During the incident, it's not the time to learn how to respond. Before COVID, many of the senior leaders went through full simulations of a ransomware and data breach. And then most importantly, and this is really where it goes back to the registrars and enrollment managers, nobody's word on their security posture should be good enough for you. Somebody should be validating that security posture that makes you comfortable with who's protecting your data. We have independent assessments regularly. And when we have these, we have them come in and we have them hold nothing back. They pound us. Our last penetration attempt, and it's taken us 3 years to get to this point, we detected and blocked 92% of about 300 penetration attempts that happened at machine speed. That's not always the case, but it's continuous improvement. Microsoft came in, we had some of the highest scores they ever seen. That wasn't always the case, continuous improvement. We get the annual SOC 2 Type 2s, it all goes back to continuous improvement. And for the registrars and enrollment managers, nobody's word should be good enough for you. You deserve more. Make sure whoever you partner with shows you that they can secure your data. And this really goes back to you as well as registrar and enrollment managers. Continuously improve those relationships. If you don't have that relationship with your CIO and CISO, take that first step and make one. Because when something happens, that's not the time you want to figure out what you should do.
John, I like the theme of your response, which is, cybersecurity is less of a destination and a lot more about the journey, right? It's a consistent iterative process. So thank you. We have our second group poll or audience poll. And the question is, which of the following policies or practices does your institution have in place? Please respond any and all that are applicable. So no surprise, password requirements are on the higher side, 93, 92%, multi-factor authentication, 78%, automatic software updates about 70, 71%, and incident response plans, 56%. Thank you for participating on that question. Joseph, what steps should registrars and enrollment managers take to enhance their institution's cybersecurity readiness?
Education, education, education. Educate yourself, educate your coworkers, educate your students. You should be aware of applicable state and federal laws when it comes to student data. FERPA and HIPAA come to mind. The REN-ISAC has a cybersecurity peer assessment service where we go out and evaluate higher ed institutions. 2/3 of the schools that we have evaluated have a recommendation. Part of the recommendation that they're not doing or not doing well enough is that they need to conduct annual FERPA training. 8 of our recommendations specifically call for a partnership between the registrar and the CIO, CISO, or the Office of IT. So as others have said earlier, registrars need to be meeting with their security professionals to design, implement, promote, and educate staff on compliance practices. They need to know your own institution's policies and procedures. And I think most importantly, as people that are in the registrar and enrollment manager positions, they're some of the first to interact with the students. They don't need to be, the staff don't need to be cybersecurity experts, but at least be a resource to point those students in the right direction so they know where to go, so they can have those safe practices online. And one final thing, think before you click.
Fair enough. Monty, in the earlier question I asked you, you gave a little bit of an answer to this question, but I wonder if you could give us a little bit more information. Given recent headlines, what should universities do if they're part of a ransomware attack?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think a lot of what John and Brian and Joseph have shared in terms of pre-incident preparation is important. Thinking about those alliances and partnerships that you have and understanding the roles and responsibilities that your partners and stakeholders will play post-incident is essential. And so when I think about it, I kind of think about it in that pre-incident and post-incident type of buckets. So I think in terms of pre-incident, John was hitting on this earlier, is, leadership should host discussions, regular discussions with a range of stakeholders across the institution to discuss what roles they will play in an incident scenario. And in particular with ransomware, I think the tough question that a lot of leaders have to discuss and answer is, will they pay ransom? And under what circumstances will they pay ransom? Now, the U.S. government has a position on this. From CRI's perspective, we think it's a business decision. We work a lot with small and medium-sized businesses in helping them to advance their cyber readiness and secure the global supply chain. And we understand that the business decision could be unique based on the particular sector or organizational structure. I think the same is true for a lot of institutions where that decision will be unique to them. And so once those decisions and those discussions have occurred, engaging the relevant stakeholders across the campus in this topic, engaging those campus stakeholders with clear communication, coming back to, I think, a point that everyone has hit around the importance of training, raising awareness, testing, all of these things are essential. When we talk about, with CRI, we talk a lot about the importance of practical human-centered approaches to enhancing cyber readiness. We have a Core 4 program that focuses on, the importance of having strong, secure passwords. A 15-character passphrase is one of the key recommendations that we make. Ensuring that that software remains updated and turning on automatic updates when and where possible. Reducing the use of USBs and removable media in an environment. I think it was Brian that talked about in the remote work environment, how many have transitioned off of their particular work location to more of a remote working type of arrangement. Some perhaps may have used or are using USBs and removable media in the place of cloud storage and cloud sharing platforms. And so, one of the things to really consider is how are you instituting those things? And then finally, we've talked all about phishing. I think, ensuring that you have the phishing awareness, understanding the social engineering threat that may exist in an environment. Those are key indicators for a pre-incident type of structure. But what you asked was about post-incident. So what I would say, key steps to really get at with when we're talking about post-incident is first to isolate the incident and take all the affected devices offline as soon as possible. I'm sure John, from a technical perspective, could go in a deep dive on this, but I think for the sake of this conversation, unplugging your device when removing it from the network is just a quick step that you should think about if you get that that terrible message that we've seen in certain posts online and things when someone's experiencing a ransomware attack. Identify the type and scope of the incident and ensure that you are contacting your IT support or your managed service or third-party service provider. And now this may be more for someone in John's position as opposed to a student or a faculty member, but understanding those lines of communication, understanding those steps that you should take are essential. Notifying the appropriate stakeholders and or customers, depending on the environment, with clear and concise communication. This is so important post-incident, and particularly with ransomware, as it can quickly become something that's on the front page of the Washington Post or some other outlet. Information will spread around with a lot of assumptions about what's happening. And I think from the universities or institutional perspective, ensuring that you're providing your stakeholders with that clear and concise information about what steps they should take, when, how, can really be the difference between, creating calm after that type of incident or sparking true chaos. And so just really understanding the importance of that communication and having those discussions, again, up front with leaders about how will we communicate, with whom will we communicate post ransomware incident. Resetting credentials and of the affected stakeholders. Again, this is maybe something more for John and someone in that position, but that's a process. So after you've taken everything offline, you've wiped the machines, then going back and resetting those credentials for the affected stakeholders, patching and reinstalling all software. We talk at CRI a lot about having non-network tested backups. So if you're not backing up your data, and especially your business critical data, then in a ransomware situation, the decision between paying and not paying becomes very difficult. If you have tested and current backups, then the decision becomes, I think, much more straightforward in terms of reinstalling those backups. And then finally, post-incident, after you've taken all of those steps, and I think this is one that maybe doesn't happen as much as it could, is conducting a hot wash with those relevant stakeholders. And then based on those learnings that come out of that type of session, updating your policies, your practices, your procedures, and your trainings to ensure that the lessons you learned during that experience don't get lost, but really move to making you a much more cyber ready organization.
Monty, thank you for that very comprehensive response. This question goes for the entire group of panelists. A question came up from one of our audience members, and I remind, if anybody wants to add questions to the Q&A section, please do so. But this is a really good question, especially in a post-COVID era, or even as we continue to navigate through COVID waters. With limited IT budgets at many schools, what are those top 3 lists of things that can help protect a school and its records in a most effective way?
I would love to jump in with some initial thoughts. So the cybersecurity market is expensive. It just is. And it gets more expensive every year. But if you speak to any cybersecurity professional, they're always going to say, well, cybersecurity is really about people, processes, and technology. Only one out of those 3 areas actually costs money. So if you focus on people and processes, if you were to look at the top 3 items, I think Monty said one key one, you can automate your updates on your devices. That costs nothing, and it's part of the operating system, and it's a huge benefit. The second one I would throw out there, you almost can't buy an application now that doesn't have some sort of security feature built into it. Maximize the security offerings within the applications that you've bought and use them versus not and having them turned off. Then the other item that I would throw out there is we hear about the concept of least privilege. A cybersecurity professional is born with this, but the easy concept is if somebody doesn't need access to your data, don't give it to them. Just don't give it to them. And that costs nothing to make sure that that is provisioned correctly. And there's probably one item, there's a 4th item that does cost a little bit of money, that is the technology perspective I would throw out there, is that having some sort of endpoint detection and response solution. Because when ransomware does happen, you do need some sort of technology in place that can respond at machine speed to stop the threat where possible. And that's just my thoughts. I'd love to hear the rest of the panel also, please.
John, I'd like to add on to that with your idea of having an army. Having some type of IT abuse or phishing email account that's monitored, turn those endpoints, your students, your faculty, and staff, into your army of detecting those things. so that it gets reported and the IT staff can make those adjustments to not let those links be accessible within the IP space of your institution. So turn your biggest vulnerability into your strength.
And again, another example, no cost.
I would just add, it's hard for me not to read all the questions and want to respond. But I think, Monty, your core four, right? They're asking for the top three. The CRI's top, or core four rather, is a great starting point. And I would just, I want to think, we talk about awareness training and education, and we're in the education business, all of us. And sometimes the word training is a sort of a dirty word for our faculty and staff sometimes. In thinking about experiential learning and Joe's point about sort of the safe driver analogy, when we think of what are the things we can do, we've done a lot over the years to raise awareness. It's like telling your teenage son to drive safe. That means something different than showing them how to drive safe or going out on the road. And I think we've done a lot around phishing and ransomware and don't click. But I think shifting how we educate our users and showing them how to enable automatic updates, right? We say it's easy, it's free, it's built in, you should go and do it. And being really more in line with the driver education and sort of road training and going through that, I think might be something that, to John's point, doesn't necessarily cost money, and it's more on the people and process side than the technology.
And I would just add to that. I mean, definitely thank you, Brian, for highlighting the core four. I think, in terms of building on that, according to Microsoft, 99% of account compromises can be avoided by implementing MFA, multi-factor authentication. And so that, again, low cost, no cost approach to just enhancing your security immediately. I think another, and John brought this up, I believe, earlier, in terms of asset inventory, this may not, be something for the student or the faculty, but definitely for the institutional kind of IT and then leadership, for them to understand what are those critical systems, critical operations and software that are core to your particular institution functioning. Right. So is it your learning management system, right? And how is the security kind of layer wrapped around the LMS versus perhaps your HR or financial operations, right? And to John's point about least privilege or zero trust, right? Who has access to those systems, right? And when, right? Because we've moved away as an industry from allowing, so you reach a certain kind of stage of access, and now you have access to everything. We call it, kind of administrative privileges. However, really, the field is moving much more towards a behavioral model, right? Where, there are certain times at which, this individual will require access to this data or this system. However, there are other times at which that will not be appropriate. Right. And so, those are some of the things that I think are important for organizations to even start thinking about now, even before you invest in anything, just understanding what your need is and what your environment is requiring. We talk a lot about kind of your understanding your threat landscape. What vulnerabilities, what risks do you have, and how are you mitigating those risks? What risk have you accepted and as just a business operation because perhaps your budget or some other reason doesn't allow you to address that now, but you accept it and you understand it. So kind of to sum all of that up, I think understanding what you have in your environment and what the associated risk is for those things, and then ensuring that you're communicating, training, and engaging with the relevant stakeholders that are essential to your business operations, I think are just some key things that all institutions should consider now.
So you panelists, you all talked about, the three basic or most important things to think about protecting your school and records. What are some important actions or steps to making a change and becoming more cyber ready. So this is more about proactivity.
Pepe,
Sure,
Monty,
ahead.
please, no, but by all means.
No, I mean, I'm going to go back to our core four. So, you know, and you can check out becyberready.com if you want to check these out. We have guides and more in-depth information. But first and foremost, you know, passwords, right? I know a lot of the conversation now is kind of moving toward a password-less environment, but for right now, we're still dealing with a lot of passwords in the wild. And so strengthening those passwords, 15-character passphrase is really what we advocate for with CRI. As I said, you know, reducing the instances of removable media and USBs in your environment, ensuring that you have those software updates, and then doing that real phishing, the training, excuse me, around phishing. And if the budget supports, like John was saying, you know, sending out those tests and giving people a sense of what a phishing email might look like, and then empowering them to report that, helping them understand what do I do now if I suspect something is awry in my environment. Two other quick things: an incident response plan, right? So don't only, you know, draft one and say this is kind of what we'll do in an incident response, but definitely test it. And then I'll just wrap up again with the importance of MFA. I can't emphasize that enough. Multi-factor authentication is just so important and a practical step that each and every one listening can take right now.
Yeah, and I'm going to add from a behavioral aspect, and to be completely blunt, change is hard, and it doesn't matter if it's cyber, it doesn't matter if it's techniques, processes. Change is hard. If the organization doesn't have the willingness and the buy-in to want to have the change, regardless if it's free or if it costs, that is a huge hurdle. So, you know, that people and that change aspect has to be worked at the same time as anything else. A user can kill a program in seconds, but they can make it just as successful also.
I have another question from one of our audience members. Oh, go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
No, I was just going to add, I think, John, you're spot on, and it's cultural. And I did see a question in Q&A around without sort of adding security, without adding complexity or making it cumbersome, right? And I think that's where we need to change that culture, where we as security professionals can enable enrollment managers and registrars to do their jobs effectively and efficiently and not impact our educators' ability to access that data because of multi-factor authentication, that these solutions are easy, that they're in line, and do it in a way that doesn't feel like it's adding friction to the interaction.
Perfect.
Yeah, and Brian, I'm right there with you. I'm reading the comments too, and kind of hitting on that same aspect of strong protection controls, and it dovetails into this. You know, security teams unintentionally sometimes make this hard because of the fear and the threat of your data getting compromised. But I'll throw out there too, there's a common sense approach to it, and it's a partnership between the data owners and the security teams on what makes sense. If you're trying to put in a nickel in Fort Knox, that probably doesn't make sense. But if you have a gold mine of data in Fort Knox, there's probably a balance there that might take a year or two to get to, but that's probably passes the common sense test a little bit easier.
Thank you. John, you answered, you made mention of this in one of your responses, but this is to anybody in the group. How can universities continually adjust to the new hybrid work conditions versus the 100% remote environment? So in other words, you know, things keep changing. We were originally all in the office, then we went full remote, and now we're migrating towards a hybrid model. And given that things are more difficult to manage in that fashion, what things should universities be mindful of as they try to protect, again, data and people?
I'll throw out there the initial thought. Just knowing where your data resides and where it goes to and who has access, regardless if you're working on-site or off-site, that is probably the biggest key. If the right security controls are in place, and I think most organizations have a large bulk of them in place that makes sense. I mean, it's not a matter of where you're working from versus where the data is going to and from. I think that would probably be the critical check.
I would just add to that, you know, having the conversations and communicating with your community around the real challenges that now this kind of hybrid work environment presents, right? So when everyone is kind of physically on campus, and they're on network, and these are machines that you can kind of you have on inventory and you can update. That's one environment, but I think it was Brian earlier that talked about the reality that students and faculty are coming with so many devices now that it just completely expands the traditional understanding of how to kind of what a security perimeter is like. And so I think it comes back to having those leadership discussions that lead to, clear policies and procedures, and then transitioning that to clear communications and training that's available and not arduous. I think someone mentioned that earlier. These can't be the trainings that everybody laments taking on an annual basis. What are the creative ways that you can engage your community? And that's something that may look different for a different university or a different institution, but I think it's kind of getting at that culture topic, that change topic that my colleagues brought up earlier. So if you have a sense for how your community will react to messages around security and good practices, thinking about how you can engage them creatively so that you can get those key messages across, and then those key messages can turn into better practices, right? Because that is what ensures that, again, that cyber readiness is raised for everyone.
And I think it's a bit of a misnomer that the hybrid work environment is new, because in many respects, it didn't really matter because you had students connecting from, say, their own apartment back to the campus. You had people working in the evenings from home. So the hybrid work environment has been there for the longest time. It's just the switch from 100% back to hybrid. So I don't think it's necessarily new, but we need to make sure that any of the behaviors or the things that we put in place, because we had to go remote immediately, that we double check those again, make sure that we didn't just throw something out there in order to get it to work during COVID, but something that's actually going to last into the future, that's going to be resilient, and put in those education practices. Okay, we did this temporarily because it was something we had to do to get things going, but let's really start doing something that's going to have a secure footprint going forward.
That's a great point, Joseph. Thank you. And this is also a question from one of our audience members. We have talked throughout the conversation this afternoon about the importance of communication. But even to be a little bit more granular with that question, when a registrar meets a CIO or a CISO for the first time, what are the most relevant questions that they can be asking? What questions do you wish an administrator would ask you when and they never do?
I've got two right off the top of my mind that I would throw out there. I think the first question, the best question you could ask your CISO is, what can I do to help? Make sure that they're on the same team. What can I do to help? And I can't tell you how many times in my career hearing that from a business owner is like, oh my goodness, what you can do to help. Does all these people really need access? I've got 1,000 questions on how you use your data that I'm making a best estimate on how to protect. Asking that question, what you can do to help, and what are the expectations of what you can provide during an incident, I think are two golden questions that will really solidify the relationship if something were to happen.
I would agree. I was thinking, how can I help? The first, as the first meeting. Yep.
And so to support that, just to go even one layer below that, and to begin to understand what the right questions would be to ask beyond, how can I help? What cybersecurity red flags should enrollment managers and registrars be on the lookout for as they think about cybersecurity in their space?
if I were to throw out red flags, you know, anything that makes, and this is not a black and white answer, unfortunately, if you're having a conversation and the hair on the back of your neck stands up, that is probably a red flag, and you should peel that onion and ask more questions. To be a little bit more concrete, I think there's some basic stuff out there that, you know, your data should be encrypted. And more importantly, whoever is holding your data, if something were to happen, how are you going to respond to it? I think those are just some really core stuff as far as red flags. If people can't answer the basic common sense questions, you should really dive deeper into the conversation and see what else is there.
Excellent. Thank you. One last question for the panel. When attendees leave this session today, what advice do you have for them to help ensure their institutions can be cyber ready and or secure?
I was going to jump in first and use John's question to tell them to go ask their CIO and their CISOs and ask how they could help. But, and I don't want to speak for Joe, Monty, and John, but I think the attendees should walk away knowing that the four of us, and that they can reach out to us and ask how we can help them. We'll share our contact info and make sure that they know both us personally and the organizations that we represent, how we can help them secure their institutions.
Yeah, I was going to just pick up on that last question as well and say, if you don't know who your CIO is or CISO is, or where they are located, right? Explore that. Find out who that person is and where that team is, because that's a critical first step to just understand who holds that responsibility, who's accountable for that within your institution. If you're in a position of leadership, right? I think inviting that individual, the CISO CIO, to come and talk to your team could be a good practice as well. And then finally, I would just note that you know, go back to your institution and ask, do we have an incident response plan? You know, I just heard about, you know, what could happen and ransomware and different types of breaches. I'm curious, you know, do we have a cyber incident response plan? And if so, where can I find it?
Don't let the fear of seeming like you're uninformed about something keep you from asking questions. Be curious. Learn all that you can.
Yeah, and I'll throw out there, and it's been the recurring theme for the last hour. You're not alone. Don't act alone. Build those relationships. You know what? We're all here to want to protect your data. We all have the vested interest. We want the learners safe, no matter how we do this. So just remember that you're not alone. Start those relationships and never hesitate to reach out to anybody and ask those hard questions.
Thank you, John. And I want to thank all our panelists again for your insights and your expertise on today's topic. I also want to thank each of the attendees today to the session. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If there are any remaining questions, please feel free to send those directly to the Clearinghouse and we will gladly either respond or route them appropriately. Cybersecurity, as we've stated today, is everyone's responsibility. An organization cannot be secure until the entire workforce is engaged in reducing cyber risks. Stay vigilant, share your knowledge, and get everyone involved. You'll all be receiving an email following up the meeting. Thank you again and have a terrific rest of your day.